This mic is not currently. Cool. All right, everybody, can you hear me? That work well? Yeah. All right, guys, we'll be starting. You want to take a? This is Nate Schwartz, the composer and producer for City Sounds. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you guys all for coming. This is a crazy, beautiful turnout of wonderful people. I've had the chance to talk to a few of you guys, and this is just awesome. So thank you guys. Please, if you could just do like a, yeah. We'll take a little quick seat here, and before we start the album, I think we just wanted to say a few things because we're gonna play the full album through. So we're gonna do it like with no in-between tracks, Q&A kind of thing. We'll just listen to the whole thing as if you're playing the whole album through, as it should be like listened to. And then at the end, we'll talk about it. So I think before I hand it over to Nate to talk about everything he wants to share before we start, I just wanted to say, A, thank you to everyone who's here. Those who like Metro Board and bought into that. Yeah. Thank you. So for those who don't know Metro Board, which I think all of you do, it's this live subway map. Me and Emily, who's right there, we are the duo behind DRC, for those who have been familiar with that three-letter acronym. And we have lived in downtown LA for like 3 years, and there was just a point where an LA Metro station opened right in front of our apartment. We heard jackhammers every day for years, and then at some point that station opened, and then I sold my car, and then we've been taking trains everywhere ever since. Do we like that? Yeah. And so we were so excited about that we wanted to kind of make a piece of art about it. Like the feeling of just like moving on these trains with dozens or hundreds of other people, going about your days, going to school, going to the bar, going to a birthday party, going to work, and just this like cool space that you guys all inhabit together as you do that. In addition to just trains and transit being kind of awesome things as part of a cool modern society. And so that's where Metro Board came from. We started with this LA thing. The LA Metro Board, rather, and then we decided, why don't we just do this for other cities? And so we literally took Amtrak across the entire United States, and we visited all 6 cities that we're doing Metro Board for, and we made those. And after that, I think this feeling of what we wanted to express in this artistically, there was this feeling of, it doesn't cover all the bases, and I think music was something that we really wanted to lean into to express, I think, that feeling of what transit offers us, the feeling of being in a city, the feeling of being among other people. And so, luckily, we know Nate Schwartz, who is a brilliant, a brilliant and talented musician, and we wanted to do something musically that was about transit and about cities and about the feeling of both of those things. And Nate brought, I think, that vision to life in a really incredible way. I think you guys are gonna like really love what you hear tonight. And so I think that's what City Sounds was. And so I'll hand it over to Nate to give a little intro to that.
Thanks, Kirill. Thanks, everybody, for being here and for supporting the project. I don't have a lot to say before you hear the record. I'm hoping that the music will do some combination of speaking for itself and inspire some questions. So thanks again to Kirill and Emily for asking me to do this. I mean, it's an immense honor and joy to have been able to take so many of the user submitted, not user submitted, but the audio samples from your daily commutes that have been submitted. There were probably 2,000 to 3,000 submissions to go through, and just to be able to, on different levels, experience a little bit of what different people are experiencing when they go about their daily commutes and all that was really cool, and to be able to try to bring the inherent musicality out of those things was really cool, and I hope you enjoy the record. That's all I got to say.
All right. And with that, me and Nate will come off stage because we want to listen in front of the speakers rather than behind the speakers as well. And then in about 45 minutes, once the album ends, we will come back up here and do the Q&A. So with that said, Brian, our super talented live stream technician, over here is going to get that streaming for folks that are tuning in and then have the album start playing. And please enjoy.
Welcome aboard the train.
This is a national train with service to the Bay, LA, Chicago, Boston, New York, and DC.
We will announce each stop with the sound of the city. Please listen closely.
San Francisco Airport, no freight train now approaching platform 2. Stand clear. The doors are closing.
Wait, madam, sir, wait a moment with me, won't you? It's so rare to have a moment of stillness. The hum of life goes on. Dust collects from the shoes of all who came before you. Your dust soon too, part of the drum of it all, the movement that carries us ceaselessly forward.
This is assembly. The destination of this train is Oak Grove.
So she started doing it now.
Next stop, airport.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the last stop. Please exit the train.
We hope you enjoyed the ride. We look forward to seeing you again soon.
Goodbye and thanks for visiting. Say goodbye, Gracie.
Goodbye, Gracie.
Sing, O Muse, of the boundless will that carved these veins through bedrock and shadow. Hear the roar of the steel worm resound, its pulse the lifeblood of countless hands that dared shape the earth, bestir the gods. No thing is eternal, yet each rivet, each track laid a testament. We strive, and in striving leave an echo. We were here. We dared.
I was gonna ask, what did you guys think? Is that it? All right, great. Okay. Cool. That's the album. Do you want to say anything about it before we get into Q&A? Do you want to share some thoughts? No. Okay. Great. Then with that said, you've got a mic, and then we'll just do Q&A. So if anybody has a question or something they want to ask about, any thoughts, anything, just raise your hand. You'll shout it, and then we'll repeat it, and then we'll talk about it. So, yeah. Yeah, cool question. So the question was basically, and this is just for everyone's awareness here, there's a live stream, so we're repeating it for them. Basically, we were sharing that there's voices from the subway systems that were included in the album, and what was that process like? Was it difficult? Were people excited about doing that? So for context, we did reach out basically to some of the iconic voices of each of the subway systems, which you guys heard in the intro, the prelude, and or the interlude and the outro. And the answer is everyone was super psyched to do it. So all of these iconic subway voices you guys heard in the intro, I think Frank Oglesby from Boston, as well as Lee Crooks from the CTA, and then what was the other? New York. Was it New York? No, that was let's see, Boston, Chicago, LA. Oh, DC. So in DC as well, Randy Miller. So she was an announcer for DC. So they were all super psyched. And then we had Charlie Pellet do the interlude as well as the sort of long monologue, the Greek chorus and the outro. And then on the outro, we also had George and Gracie from Bart, which were sort of synthesized text-to-speech voices, which we didn't ask them. They're just software. So those are pretty easy. It was super straightforward. Everyone was excited. It was great. And they were immediately super into it. They all contributed their voices, and it was a cool touch, as you're going through it, to sort of just hear in this intercom-y, I'm in the subway car kind of feeling oh, this is the same person who announces that the doors are closing when I go to work and he's on this album. It's kind of a weird sensation. So yeah, they were all super psyched. Some of them might be listening to the live stream right now. They're obviously not in LA, a lot of them. But yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, LA Metro as well on the outro. It's so hard to remember all the things that come into it. But we had some friends at LA Metro who connected us with the folks who do the voiceover. They're over there right now. To the folks who do the voiceover, and we're sworn to secrecy, so we can't tell you who does the voiceover. But the voice of LA Metro is on the outro as well, which is super great because we are, after all, as you guys know, LA based. So it's great to make sure we have all the voices in there. Next question. If there's any others. Yes.
I'm going to repeat as much of your question as I remember, but you asked as far as, first of all, thank you. And you asked how much I changed the BPM throughout. Thank you. Well, each track, let's see, Bay Area, LA, Chicago, New York, and DC are all, they have a pulse. Boston's the only one that's kind of the ambient thing going on, and there's not really a pulse to it. But everything else is 1 BPM the whole time. I think it's like, I don't remember exactly, but it's like 81 for the Bay Area, similar for LA. And LA has so for LA, I should say, 2 of my friends who are incredible musicians. My friend, a drummer, Ryan McDermott, who tours with a couple artists. He tours with Jameson, who's like this Detroit R&B singer, and he has toured with Haim in the past. He played all the acoustic drums on the LA track. And then my friend Derek Wong, who's an incredible electric bass player, came up like in the reggae scene down here. We met playing for Andy Grammer actually. And he plays incredible electric bass, and those were the 2 kind of instances of live musicians contributing live instruments. And so there is sort of the rhythm they're playing is breathing a little bit more so than the other tracks with the pulse, which all have drum machine and synthesized drums and stuff that's more like to a grid. But so I'm not sure if that exactly answers your question, but on each track, the BPM does not waver. Yeah. Oh, where did that come from? Well, so you asked where the BPM for each city kind of came from, and kind of bigger picture as far as the process for this, there was a lot of, the first thing I would do was, open up, I used Logic for all this, so I would open up Logic and open up the Google Drive folder that Curl and Emily had put together of everybody's submissions of the recordings they'd taken, and just like start going through everything, and just like listening for character and or energy and or something like harmonic or melodic in some way, and if there was a rhythm to anything. I mean, I didn't really think about it that much, but as I'm walking around just like in my daily life, I feel like how many people in here are musicians of some type? Anybody? There's a handful of hands, but maybe you know this feeling of like when you're walking around, the world can just like sound musical sometimes, like the things in your environment have inherent musicality, and they, for whatever reason, when I'm listening through all the audio that was submitted, I would just think like, okay, let's try something. There were a couple tracks actually, the DC track, and I'm trying to remember if there was one other one, but LA and DC really went through the most, and Boston too actually. I had started them one way back in January, and then as I kind of followed that thread, I realized that ultimately, like the environmental sounds were pulling a different way, and the direction that I had sort of been going was not working, or just didn't have the clarity. And I really need to thank Curl and Emily for never letting me get musically lazy with this at all. I mean, as much as they're able to from an email thread, when something wasn't like the first directions that I was taking, a couple of them just were not, as I was following the thread, they just were not developing into something that was maybe as captivating as some of the other ones had been once we sort of set the bar. I think the first one that was like fully finished in a way that was like, okay, this is the bar as far as energy, was the New York one. And then we sort of started shooting for like, that's the ideal as far as dynamics and energy. And so this is a very long-winded answer to your simple question, but the sounds all had musicality, and I just kind of, I was following whims and flying by the seat of my pants here. is really what I'm saying. Thanks. Thank you.
Next question. Yes.
That's right. That's a really good question. The question was asked, were there any audio that was submitted that were particularly unique or stood out?
Of like 2,000 to 3,000 audio clips. Yeah.
There definitely were, and I'm trying to think specifically. There are a few categories, I would say, of like types of sounds that would come in, and among them are the longer, more sustained sounds of like a train coming into a station and braking, or its engine humming and then it's leaving, and those kind of last a long time, and that's one type of thing. There's also people just chatting in any number of environments, and the sound of like social activity. There's the sound of cars and or buses and honking and vehicle traffic, and then there's foot traffic, sometimes in enclosed spaces or in open spaces. And with that, there's sometimes like the sounds of, there were a couple, I think 2 of the tracks ended with some type of like birds chirping. I think the Bay and New York both did that. And then beyond that, there's like construction sites. There was one, I would say the most unique stuff that made the record, because honestly, a lot of the really unique audio samples are the ones that are the hardest to make, to turn into, to pull the musical utility out of, because they're the most either cacophonous or like untamable. But there were sounds of like, a manhole cover falling, or somebody dropping a big steel pipe or something, and somebody riding their bike. Yeah, I mean, I wish I could think of a. There's not really. I can't think of anything more specific than that, but I hope that's a somewhat satisfactory answer.
And I think I'll add, like when you listen to it here, your first time listening, you're listening on like a macro scale a little bit. And me and Emily and Nate especially have like listened to these tracks. Me and Emily probably dozens of times, Nate probably thousands of times, and every time you listen to them, you notice a new sound you didn't hear before. And I think there's this like elegance that Nate had to like how these transit sounds get included in the tracks, and you just like have like a slightly new experience every time if you're focused on finding them. It's a little bit of like an Easter egg hunt with some of the sounds, and it's like the bicycle sound, the bus sound, the manhole dropping sound, and it's so. Every time I hear it, even though I've heard some of them like dozens of times, I feel like I'm hearing it a little bit for the first time. And so I think there's really unique, special sounds that you're only going to get listening to this again and again and again, and not on the first playthrough at a bar. You know what I mean? So
I should also add to that. I mean, and I almost want to apologize for this, because people have supported this record in part because they were expecting to hear the sounds of these transit systems. But in producing the music, I very much was trying to blend the sounds of the instruments I was using and everything with the transit sounds to make it really hard to tell what's transit and what's like an instrument. And so I apologize if you can't tell and if it's hard to discern what's what. But
I think you did a beautiful job. I think you did a masterful way. If
Thanks.
everyone agree, yeah.
Thank you.
I think when I listen to them, I can only describe the balance of transit sounds and music as elegant. I think that's the word I would use. And I think the goal of the record from mine and Emily's side was sort of blending. What we talked to Nate about was sort of blending these transit sounds and these submissions from everyone around the country with the feeling of being in these cities and what it meant to be in LA or the Bay Area or Chicago, Boston, DC, New York, as well as their musical history. And this just like, we were just talking before this all started around 6 o'clock about how that's kind of an impossible task. Like a city is just like so multi-dimensional and huge, and your perspectives and your experience are there's millions of them, right? And so I think that's a very complicated challenge and task. But I think when we've listened to these tracks so many times, we think that the combination of the sounds of the transit and the feeling of the city that I think you invoke in what you did, I feel are very masterful. That's, so.
Thanks, dude.
What else we got? We got one over there.
Thanks for that question. The question was asking if I could talk a little bit more about the musical history, for example, of each city and/or how and I'm paraphrasing, so correct me if I'm wrong, but like how the character of each city and my experiences with them kind of like played into and shaped each track. So my musical background, I play bluegrass mandolin, and I play, guitar in a few groups, and I curate playlists for SiriusXM and Pandora, and I've gotten to tour the United States playing mandolin and playing guitar 5-ish times now. So one thing we were talking about is like I haven't spent an equal amount of time in each city. I was born in Boston, lived outside of Boston for about 8 years, spent the next 10 years in the Bay Area, and have lived in LA for 11 years. Chicago, DC, and New York. Well, so I have my mother and grandmother live in New York, so I go there a decent amount. And spent 2 months living there last summer. I haven't spent as much time in Chicago or DC, so my time there was as a part of being on tour with one band or another. But, and again, it's impossible to, I really wanted to, as much as I could, in a very small way, kind of like gesture towards the rich regional musical history that exists in not just each of those 6 places, but like regional musical styles are such a big part of what I don't know, love about, at the very least, this country where I've spent most of my time, but like that's so common around the world. And for example, Chicago was the first one that I sort of started rendering out for Kirill and Emily when they asked me to do this. So I was like,
can I just say you sent that in like 1 week, and it was incredible, and we were like, oh my God, Nate, this is fantastic. And I think what you're about to share was one of the things that we heard from you, that we were like, Nate is really tuned in to the beautiful history of all these cities in a sense. And I think that it's imbued in a way that if you're not as familiar with the musical history of some of these cities and the history in general, that you wouldn't recognize. And I think to me it was really stunning when you shared the Chicago background with us, just like the richness that you come at each of these tracks and each of these cities with. So I just wanted to share that, and please continue.
Well, thanks. And I also cannot claim to be any sort of like deep musical history expert of any particular area. But I did want to, like for Chicago, I was like, oh, I have to pay some homage to like Frankie Knuckles and the Chicago house scene and that type of stuff. And yeah, and I mean, so there was like whatever the Chicago one sounded like, that was my attempt to just pay tribute a little bit to that. And those manifest as like the choice of kick drum sound and the choice of drum pattern and the choice of like, I want the chord progression to do this and to all be that sort of like, it's one chord voicing, like a minor 9th chord that you're just bouncing up and down, at least in a couple parts of that song. And then the Bay Area, like having grown up there, been there since 3rd grade, really end of 2nd grade until the end of high school, my dad was going through his midlife crisis, which resulted in us forming a family bluegrass band that we played in for 10 years. And at the same time, like at school, kids were listening to Mac Dre and Andre Nicotina, and like all the hyphy stuff was going on, and like that was just such a part of being in the Bay Area. And like Silicon Valley was emerging as this sort of, beacon of boldness at the very least. And I think that was probably so I started with Chicago, made that one, or like started rendering a sketch of that one, and it was housey for those historical reasons. And then Boston, I was really trying to channel some I wanted to channel some of the, frankly, like the UK influence, like the Irish influence of Boston in some way. And like having grown up there, I wanted it to be, I don't know, I was channeling personal feelings into the Boston one and was trying to take it in a more rhythmic direction at first, but then as some of the other ones started to shape up, the Boston one, it was like, maybe make this one pulseless, more of an ambient thing, more of a, this one might not need drums. And the LA one, definitely wanted it to feel like, I was so captivated in high school by the low-end theory scene, and that's like one of the reasons I wanted to come to LA, the stuff that Flying Lotus and Thundercat and I didn't know at the time, but beat makers like Knowledge and Madlib and like Jay Dilla having come here and done Donuts on Stone's Throw and the left field experimental hip hop stuff that was happening here, especially in the early 2000s, that I found my way to it, or it found its way to me through other people in high school, wanting to pay homage to that, and also to the sort of dichotomy between like the hyper, like the entertainment industry side of LA and like the super rich musical underground that's here that has so many different scenes and manifestations. And that's why the LA one kind of goes between the, more halftime, like almost reggae thing. And I'm, there's a real reggae bass player on there. So, and then if you double time that, you get drum and bass. And it was like, we can go between those two things. And then DC, I really wanted to, again, that's like, the seat of the government and all this stuff. And we kept talking about, who really knows what's going on in DC? Who really knows what's going on in all those buildings? And so I was trying to take that one way first. And these guys are not from DC, but I really wanted to pay homage to Drexcia, which is a Detroit techno duo that had this whole mythos about, seafaring, or like basically mermaids that were descended from people who had been brought across the Atlantic in the transatlantic slave trade and had been, had gone underwater and like formed a whole civilization. And that was their very political mythos around their techno. And I thought that was a very, captivating it was a very captivating thing. And I wanted to, do something I was trying at a slower tempo, like trying to make some like electro, because that's what I associate with them, between electro and techno, trying to make something like that to channel the sort of mystery that surrounds what we all, at least those of us who don't live or frequent DC, how it might appear to us, just being always talked about. And ultimately, it just ended up, tempo went up, and it got even more twisted. And I think I finished DC in the last, 2 or 3 days. Was literally, fine-tuning it, yesterday. And I think that covers all of them.
You got them all, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And the only thing I'll add to your question, which was a big one, and I think those were fantastic, insights into the process, was just the other end of this, which was Nate creating these tracks and sending us drafts and us listening to them and what that experience was like. Because I think there's a transformation from like your personal experience and background in these cities and your understanding of what they are and their history to like another person's experience and backgrounds of these cities. And I always, we did this train trip across all these cities and rode their subways. And for me, one of the things when I heard each of these tracks was just like closing my eyes and imagining looking out of one of the subway cars as we were riding one of these metro or subway systems and imagining both how I felt in the city and in that space, as well as just kind of the energy of being and moving around that city. And I think it's just a great experience thinking back to those moments with these tracks overlaid. And I think, when we like sent comments and thoughts to Nate, I think that all of them were just like, this feels exactly like it felt looking out the window and being in the city and walking around. Or it was like, well, for us, it felt like this way. And like, what do you think of that experience? And like, does that fit into your vision and understanding of this city and like how you musically represent it? And so I think that was a cool experience going like back and forth like that between your experience in those cities and what they mean to you and our experience. And I think there was this very interesting dialogue between those two and how they evolved that I thought was really cool.
I think so too, and I want to get to any other questions, but I also just have to say, like, the feedback that Curl and Emily were giving me was some of the most helpful, constructive, and very like nuanced and specific, actionable feedback that I've ever gotten in a creative process. And like, I know at one point, Emily even like to convey the energy trajectory that she was envisioning, like drew a graph of how the Chicago one, which the sketch that they had liked was, the first one was Chicago. So Emily drew a graph of the energy trajectory and the balance of instrumental sounds versus transit sounds in the Chicago track, and then drew a similar graph for the drafts of the Bay Area and Boston that I had sent, and the Bay Area-Boston balance between transit and instrumental stuff was not really comparable to that of Chicago. And so they were saying like, hey, the trajectory and the balance and the dynamics are feeling different, and like, let me graph it for you, and like, can you shoot more for like this graph and like maybe less like this graph? And I was like, this is so sick. Like, I've never gotten somebody graphed the energy trajectory of some shit that I made. Like, oh my God, so cool.
Yeah, really cool. What other questions we got or thoughts? Yeah.
You're really opening a can of worms here, my friend. My goodness.
So the question was, if you could make a bonus track for this album, like what city in the world would you like want to create a track like this for?
This isn't, well, what immediately comes to mind is for a very long time, because I play guitar, I've really wanted to go to southern Spain because it's a critical area in like the history of building the guitar and inventing it and turning it into the instrument that it is today. And I feel like it's situated in such an interesting place. London, I have so much love for the UK, especially the electronic music in the UK, particularly like the early, everything from like UK garage stuff from the early 2000s to the early like UK dubstep stuff from 2008 to 2013 or so. That's like my favorite stuff. So those are the first two that come to mind. I guess southern Spain isn't really a city, but they do have cities there.
Anybody else raise a hand at all for any questions? Yes.
Well, so those were actually written by our friend Emily over here. Emily wrote the dialogue for those. Yeah, give it up for Emily.
Yeah.
Because those really brought it together. I mean, adding the way that the human voice contrasts with the instrumental stuff is, I think, very it makes the words even that much more potent. And Emily's writing is very, there's a spiritualness to it, and almost like an existential quality.
Emily, do you want to talk about this
Yeah,
at all, or
can
do
you
you
come
want me
take
to
the
try
mic,
and come?
please?
All right, let's go. Yeah.
Hey. I wrote some of the intro and outro stuff because Kirill had reached out and done a great job of finding all of the different voices from all of the different systems. Shout out LA Metro. Hey! And so we had just gotten a lot of really great feedback from all of the voices of the systems that they wanted to participate. So then we were trying to figure out how do we integrate these in a way that doesn't interrupt the flow of what Nate has put together, because at that point we had already heard a lot of his tracks, and we were like shoehorning I don't know how to integrate sort of text into the musical text that Nate had put together. So then we were like, why don't we try to come up with an intro, interlude, outro sequence that we can kind of marry to the pieces without interrupting that flow. And in the process of doing that, we were trying to think about how do you, there are these voices that instruct you kind of passively on your way, on your commute, and you listen to them and they soundtrack your life, but you don't really pay attention to them because you've heard them 100 times before. So how do you take that and make that something interesting to listen to? How do you kind of break out of the passivity with which you just kind of intake those voices? And so I was trying to think about ways to shoehorn all of this, or to bookend all of the music that Nate had made. And I came up with, I had been reading for the first time ever a collection of Anne Sexton's poetry, which at 28 was too late, but also I'm so glad that I have the rest of my life to read her work now. So I was like, what if we did some poetry in that style? And then I had also really been getting into big love movies, and Chris Nolan doing The Odyssey was super exciting for me. So I was going back to read The Odyssey, and Emily Wilson had also done a couple of really great translations of it. And so I had been really interested in Greek choruses. And I was like, what if we did some of that? So wrote a couple drafts in a couple different styles. And then we were like, what if we did sort of, you start with your expected intro with, hey, welcome to the train. You hear these voices and they are saying familiar things with these familiar voices. And then in the interlude, you kind of break out of that mold that you've heard them speak to you in, and they start to get a little bit more introspective, which we thought was kind of fun. And then in the outro, you have a little bit more of that expected instructional bit, and then you get a little bit more into, a philosophical bent about the machine that you're riding on and the people that it took to build it, and this technology that runs, this machinery that runs parts of your lives that you don't pay attention to, that as you continue on in the world and there are advances in the tools that we use every day, and we stop paying attention to how crazy they are, and to how many people and how many hours, how many years it took to build these things. And we're all just these little humans standing on the shoulders of giants, experiencing the world through the lens of these tools that people have built before us. How do you bring a little bit of that perspective back to your daily commute? So that's kind of where we took the outro bit, and we had the wonderful voice of Charlie Pellet. Is he stand clear of the closing? Stand clear of the closing doors, please. And he was such a gem. When we reached out to him, he was like, I'll do it, but not if it's a commercial project, not if it's something, like an ad. And so we sent him the text that we wanted him to read, and he was like, I'm in. I'll do it. So that was really gratifying. That was super exciting. Cool. And it was just the process of trying to make these voices that you listen to and this machinery that you interact with go from being something passive and expected to something that you think a little bit more about and interact with a little bit more deeply. So it was a really fun process.
Any other questions? Yes. Yeah.
What's my favorite part was the question. right now, today, sitting here, DC is the one that I've listened to the fewest times, and so I'm the least tired of it. But I don't know that I have a favorite part. I mean, there really was an attempt, and I thank Curl and Emily for this, for not letting me compromise on any one of the tracks on momentum, I guess. So I have I have a unique type of love for each of those tracks.
And I think that matches, I think, our experience and what I think we love about what you've put together, which is that each of these are so different. Like, right? They're like so dynamic and so unique. Like, you started off and it's the Bay Area, and that thing is just awesome, right? And then there's the LA track, and there's the drum and the drums and the bass, and that's super unique. And then you follow that up with Chicago, which is house, which is it just feels like a big turn from the last two tracks. And then Boston is this, at least for me, a very like slower, introspective kind of track. And then New York was, I think, like you said, was one of the tracks where when you sent it to us, we responded. We were like, "Oh, this is it! Like, this is like one of our like favorite tracks." Nate sent that, like a month and a half, two ago, and we live in downtown LA, me and Emily, and it was one of those rainy days, and I just put on my headphones as soon as Nate sent that, downloaded it, listened to it on repeat, and walked around downtown LA, which is the closest you can get to feeling like you're in New York, right? Like in LA. And walking around, it was one of those beautiful, rainy, cloudy days in LA that you get once every like 1,000 years, right? And so I'm walking around and I'm going up to Bunker Hill where the skyscrapers are, and there's this rain and the umbrella, and there's this just like, I'm looking up and the sound of New York feels like it's taking me. I'm like swirling in circles, and there's all these buildings around me, and it's like moving me, and it's taking me, and I feel like I'm in the hustle and bustle, and I feel like I'm being moved through the same energy that I remember from walking the streets of New York. And then after that, you do have DC as well, which I think was one that we worked on for a while. But I think like me and Emily are moving out of our apartment right now, and we've just been like listening to this song on repeat because it's such a bop. It's like so cool. It's like so awesome. And so all of these sounds, I think like when you go through them, I think what I love about it is A, they're all so unique and differentiated, and B, because of the fact that they're unique and differentiated, I feel like you really are going on a journey as you listen through the album. Like, it really is a travel throughout the cities. And I think back a little bit to like our travel when we got on an Amtrak train in Los Angeles and spent 12 hours on a train going to Oakland, and then rode the BART, and then got on another Amtrak train and spent 48 hours on a train to Chicago. And then we rode the L, and we got on another train, and we went to Boston, New York, DC. And it was just like, that's a journey, and each of those are different. And I think the train transports you between each of these as it is, which is slow and methodical and focused. And you get between each of them, and they are their own person. They are their own character. And I feel like when I listen to the album, I'm taken back to that journey, which is not a 2-hour flight, not a 45-minute flight from here to the Bay Area, and a 2-hour flight from the Bay Area to Chicago. It is a 48-hour journey through like Colorado and Nevada and Nebraska, and we eventually get to Illinois. And that is a different place on the planet, and it feels different, and it has its own culture, and it has its own life and its own history. And so when I listen to the album, I feel that entire journey and all of those feelings. And I think that's really special. And I think that's something that felt really amazing about what Nate put together, was this journey, musical, spiritual, emotional, sonic, throughout these spaces. And I think the fact that they were all unique sonically and musically was a really big contributor to that feeling. So, yeah.
The one other thing I would say, and thank you for that question, by the way, is thanks. I think consciously tried to make it so that no individual track was my favorite. Like, I really wanted them to all compete for my own. Also, my musical tastes are so all over the place. If you walked in between 7 and 7:55 or so, you heard the Shangui de Guantanamo group, which is this Eastern Cuban. Basically, it's their version of like hillbilly old time music that sounded exactly the same way since about 1850. And like, I love that. And I love bluegrass, and I love classical stuff, and I love particular types of screamo and death metal. And like, it just, every 4 days, like I am, switching what I'm listening to. And there's things that I love also because my day job, I'm a music curator. And so I've found things in as many styles of music as I'm aware of, which I know enough to know that there's probably tons that I'm not aware of. There's something that I like in every type of music, and I need like a big, a widely varied musical diet is what I require to sustain myself.
Any other questions? Raised hands. No. Okay. Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah. I did want to talk about this and close out with it. Please. So I'm glad you asked. We forgot to mention this in the intro, but this album art is done by this artist. Do you want to talk about it, Emily, actually? Yeah, please come up. Because Emily worked with Gregoria the most, so I feel like she should talk about this.
We found an incredible artist named Gregorio who does sort of these exaggerated portraits, almost surreal looking, and we thought they were so cool. It's like the people become like visions or emotions bigger than themselves, and we thought that would be a great way to capture kind of the feeling of, one, riding in a subway train when you're with a bunch of strangers and they're all their own unique, incredible people, and you get to just kind of like, it's like eye candy. You sit on a train and you get to watch people going about their days. There's always something a little bit weird, a little bit frustrating, a little bit divine going on the subway. And I'm sure if you've ridden LA Metro, you know that to be true. But we thought that he captured people in a way that was so great. It like bolstered their humanity, but also elevated them to something a little bit more than human. And we wanted a bunch of his characters to be all in a subway car together, sort of representing all of these cities coming together, and then just the experience of being on a train with all these different archetypes and characters. And he did an incredible job. We're a huge fan of his work. We have him tagged on all of our Instagram posts and our Twitter posts, so if you haven't seen those, you should go look at his work. This is obviously, our personal favorite, but he also does a ton of other really great work. And it was just, it was a joy working with him, trying to pull out a bunch of different characters and get a bunch of different feelings. And he also did another piece for the back of the album that we don't have featured here, but it's equally as great. And you'll get to see that if you guys ordered the vinyl. And we'll probably post it sometime too. But yeah, he was super awesome to work with, and we love it. If you haven't had a chance to look at it, come before you leave and take a look at each of the people. One of the notes we had to give him was, everyone in the first draft was smoking, and we were like, they don't do that in the US so much on trains, so we actually have to cut a couple of the cigarettes. But you can still tell that there are remnants of where they were smoking. The hand posture is there. But yeah, come take a look. All of these people are great characters, and we love, love, love the album art.
Do you guys like it? Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, I think it's beautiful. Yeah, when you guys see the back, you'll like it as well. It's very familiar. Any other questions? Yes. You mean like, so the question was, is there any plan to put the music into the metro experience of the city? Do you mean like sort of like as you're riding like the train? Kind of like, do we want to play the music? Yeah, okay, yeah. The answer was yes. Would you want to talk to the metro officials about this? So I think it's this interesting question of like, are we working actively with these transit agencies? And the answer is a little bit, but like not super really. But we do. So like we got some friends in like LA Metro, for example. But we for the most of the other agencies, we don't know too many people. But part of it is just like getting started and like creating something like Metro Board and something like City Sounds. Because at that point, you like come to the agency and you say like, look, we have this like live map of your subway, and we have this like beautiful album of what it feels like to be in your city on your system. And at that point, you can have real conversations. Until that point, it's kind of like this random email from Nate Schwartz at gmail.com saying like, I made an album about your transit system. Do you want to like play it while you ride the train? And they're kind of like, no, yeah, probably not. And so I think you've got to build a little bit of like, let's call it legitimacy before you start having those kinds of requests. But I think the interesting thing for us has been a bit of like, as we do Metro Board and the album, we're not actively emailing or chatting anybody at the transit agency saying like, hey, we're doing this and this. What do you think? We're just kind of like letting people find it and explore it and identify it on their own and form their own opinions and experiences with what do they think of this? Like, instead of sending someone like, hey, we made this album with sounds of your subway, it's like someone finds it and then they ride the Chicago L to work or the New York subway to work or Metro to like a ball game. And then they're kind of like, this feels like what it feels like to be like in LA or Chicago or New York. And I think this is something special, and I want to do something with this, and I'm going to bring it back to the office when I come back on Monday. And so I think we're doing it kind of a bit passively right now. And in the future, there'll be some more formal collaboration. But I think, both us, me, Emily, Nate, everybody else involved in the project, as well as those at the transit agencies, love transit and love trains. And so I think there will be like cool opportunities to do something together. But to answer your question, nothing formal yet, but we'll do a lot of stuff together in the future, I think.
I just want to add a little bit to what you said, because you touched on something that has been kind of a theme for like a touch point of inspiration for me throughout this process and in most of my musical life, which is like your question was sort of touching on what is the ideal way in which to listen to this in a way. Like listening to it on the transit system, is one thing, but ideally, like you're saying, if an individual is to put their, headphones on and listen to this while they're on their commute, I would hope that the music will deepen their relationship with what they're doing every day. And like something that really captivates me about, I think this is true of musical traditions around the world and throughout history, is that people always try to emulate the sounds of their environment in their musical traditions. And this, in the United States, fiddle and banjo dance music were emulating the sounds and rhythms of industrialization for the entire time that they were doing that. And they turned those sounds and the sounds of their environment into essentially like the first trance music. Maybe not the first trance music, but some of the earliest in the history of this country, like what we would think of today as being trance music. It existed before electronic music, but it was still these 20 to 30 minute long journeys on a very simple idea influenced by the sound of the environment, that were an attempt by a group of people to connect more deeply to their world and their surroundings through music. And so to the extent that people's individual experiences with this record are doing that, I think then I've accomplished what I've set out to do with it. And yeah, I don't know. You got me thinking about that.
Yeah, no, and I'll just close out by saying that when we reached out to Nate, we basically set this example of, we're thinking about like, we want like an ambient album. And, what came to mind that we referenced in the email to you was basically Aphex Twin, which is way more percussive, very prolific. Oh, a little howl for Aphex Twin. And then Brian Eno's Airports. And, I think we were very Aphex Twin biased, I think. Something more percussive.
I was.
Yeah, definitely. I think, and we love a percussive element to this. But I think, as we went through this journey, I would wake up every day, go and grab a coffee a few blocks away. But when I left my building, I would put on my headphones and I would put on Nate's latest track. And I would listen to it for the few blocks that I walked. And depending on which track it was, I would try and put myself in the position of being in that city to the extent that I've been in it, or on that subway system to the extent that I've ridden that subway system, and try and like imagine what it felt like in those circumstances to listen to music that augmented the experience, that didn't ask me to step away from where I was and step into the world that the music was trying to create for me, which is another totally beautiful experience you can have with music, but rather to augment where I was and to complement what I was experiencing and see something new or resonate with what I was already seeing. And I think that, to me, is what makes something ambient, is like it lets you resonate with, or it lets you kind of like balance with what's in front of you, and amplify it. And so I think in that sense, like listening to all these tracks, the cities that we're not in, remembering what it was like and trying to be in that moment, or for LA, walking to Grand Central Market, walking along the beach, Santa Monica or Venice, going to Hollywood, being in Highland Park, wherever it was, and listening to LA and seeing how we felt, and did that feel like it matched what it felt to be like in those places? And I think the answer was always basically a resounding yes. That's, yeah. Okay, any final questions? Cool. Anything you've got to say, Nate, before we...
No, just thanks for supporting this project. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for asking me to do this.
Cool. We hope you guys liked it. It's awesome. We'll basically, once we're pressing the vinyl now, once the vinyl gets sent to everybody, it will be basically 2 months or so. The vinyl will be the only way you can listen to it. After that, we'll start streaming it, and people can start listening to it otherwise. If you want to support City Sounds and that project, or Metro Board, you can go to our website, designrules.co, and figure that out. But really, more than anything, we're just grateful that you guys are all here and listening to this and excited to hear it. So thank you guys. And then please hang around. We'll be here, huffing around, excited to talk to you, all you guys. And yeah, thank you.